take a minute to swear you in, Mr. Barnes. Do you swear that you tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Do you have any remarks for us before we pepper you with questions?
Well, maybe a little background on where I came from, how I got here. I was finance director for the city of Harrisburg from 1980 to 1985. See somebody checking a date there. I was hired by Paul E. Doutrick Jr. when he was mayor. So I've been there for a number of years, 2 years before the mayor took office, Mayor Reed took office. I spent 5 years there. After that, I went to work for Milt Lopus at a firm called Financial Management Services, which later was acquired by or merged with, they like to say, Public Financial Management, and where I stayed for another 10 years until I left there to go back to work for Milt Lopus Associates. Milt Lopus was a former Secretary of Revenue who had done financial advisory work back in the 80s, even when I was finance director. He served as the financial advisor to the Harrisburg Authority. I went to work for him, and I assumed some of those jobs relating to the authority. I'm basically a numbers guy. In 2001, Milt suffered a series of strokes and retired. I took over the business. I started a separate company. It is Excel Financial Advisors, formerly doing business as Milt Lopus Associates. So I worked for the authority in 2003 through 2007, at which time I was let go by the authority. And haven't really had much to do with anything at the city for the past 6 or 7 years now. I'm sorry, about 5 years, I guess it's been since I left the authority, a little over 5 years. I'll gladly answer any questions you have about anything. It's a big span of time, but I'll do my best to answer your questions.
Thank you. Senator Fulmer, do you want to start?
I have a few questions, sir, and Mr. Barnes, thank you very much for being here. Your name and your firm are listed in the very front of the forensic audit, which notes your firm was the financial advisor to the authority during the period of 1990 through the summer of 2007, and you were previously employed as a staff person at the city under Mayor Reed. As this gives you a unique perspective on many of the financial deals of the city and the authority, describe the authority's Special Projects Fund. Who set up the fund? How was it operated? What was the money used for? Did Mayor Reed directly make the decisions regarding the use of this fund?
As financial advisor to the authority, my involvement with them is mainly transaction-based. I learned more about the Special Projects Fund through the forensic audit and the discussion here today than I knew about it then. I didn't really have any type of involvement with the Special Projects Fund.
Okay. Did Mayor Reed control the authority board and staff?
The authority board was appointed by the mayor and confirmed by council until that was litigated, I believe in 2006. The mayor was certainly a strong mayor in the city, made a lot of decisions and recommendations to the board, I'm sure, but the board was their own entity. I attended almost every board meeting, heard a lot of the discussion in public of most of the matters that are being discussed today, and the board was the final say in what went on there.
Did Mayor Reed determine which finance professionals would be hired by the authority? For instance, did James Losty provide financial advice to the authority and the city regarding the structuring of the incinerator bonds and swaps?
Yes. The mayor appointed officials to the financing team through the various boards and councils, but I would say most of the decisions and recommendations were made by the board, and most of the recommendations were made by the mayor, and most of the recommendations were adopted by the board.
Mr. Barnes, do you believe it was a good idea for the authority to enter into the incinerator swaps? And how did the authority choose RBC as the counterparty to do the swaps? And how much money did your firm make on the swaps?
Which swaps are you specifically talking about? We've done a lot of swaps for the city. The city was one of the first entities.
Let's narrow it down to the 2003.
To be honest with you, Senator, I mean, it's been, many years since I've, looked at that. It was 10 years ago, 9 years ago. The swaps that we did then, I'm sure I believed in the process of the swaps and the outcome of the swaps. A couple of the swaps that we did were very favorable to the city. And swaps are not necessarily as bad, even though they have the bad reputation that they have. One of the swaps fixed the cost to the city at 3.35%. That's a successful financing rate in anybody's book.
What do you remember about the swaps?
What do I remember about the swaps? I remember that we did the swaps.
Were they unique? Were they, I mean, was it?
Some of the swaps were unique. Most of the swaps that we did, and when we did them, were done for a reason. Some of the swaps were done to generate additional funds for the project because they desperately needed cash to finish the project. Some of the swaps were done short-term gain for long-term pain. I don't necessarily have the approval right. Again, I gave financial advice to the authority. I didn't make the financial decisions. The swaps that were done later on, and particularly unwinding some of them, were to raise capital. And I think that most of the swaps we had were reasonable at the time under the conditions that we had.
Have you seen similar other ones, other projects that did similar swaps?
Yes.
Okay. Is it unique?
No, swaps were fairly widely used. There were a number of swaps that were done around that period. As the market permitted, it was beneficial. You could actually borrow money at a variable rate and enter into a swap at a fixed rate that was considerably below where the market was for conventional financings. A lot of those swaps were advantageous for that purpose.
And as a second portion of my questions about the swaps, I don't know if you answered this, I apologize, but I don't think I heard the answer. How much money did your firm make on the swaps?
I don't recall that my firm, that the fee was broken out or what it was.
Is this information available?
I can certainly try to find it for you. The information that I was paid for the swaps would have been in the interest rate management plan adopted by the city that was done at the time. So yes, that information is available in the interest rate management plan after the amendment of the Local Government Debt Act that permitted swaps in Pennsylvania.
Would you be able to guess that information?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, earlier, as my last question, earlier today, I asked Commissioner Haste about the guarantee fees the county charged, and he said PFM said such fees were not uncommon. Would you comment on such fees?
It was not unusual for the city to charge a guarantee fee for a number of authorities, not just the Harrisburg Authority, but the Harrisburg Parking Authority also paid guarantee fees for the city. But I don't recall seeing it with any of my clients outside of the city.
Okay, you answered that. I was going to ask that if you've seen it outside the city. Okay, thank you. I'm through with my questions.
Thank you. Senator Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Barnes, for your testimony and your presence here today. Senator Fulmer again talked about a few of the issues I was going to bring up, but there's really only two things that I want to get a handle on in your capacity as financial advisor to the authority. I guess there are some pretty powerful assertions made in the forensic audit, and some of those assertions, on their own may have merit. I think others might under additional scrutiny, and at least on the basis of some of the response I saw from legal counsel for the county, there are some things that I think require a deeper look. But two things: the issue of, I guess, whether or not you in your representation of the authority or as a financial advisor to the authority attempt to vet or challenge the projections of Barlow. There doesn't seem to be anything that kind of questioned the validity of those representations. And do you recall, I understand you're going back a long timer, but do you recall looking at those and having reservation about those representations upon which these bond issues were based?
You brought up a number of things there. The one being the audit that was done. My involvement with the audit consisted of about an hour of sitting down with two of the people and sitting in my office and talking about it. I offered to get more information when they wanted it, and never heard about it again. It's one of those things that you sit back and look at and see that it is in fact lacking, the audit. And I realized that the authority had a limited resources to undertake something like this, and it was very complicated. As far as the self-liquidating debt certificate issued by the engineer, that's what's called for in the Local Government Debt Act. I would say I spent a lot of time reviewing revenue projections, assessing them with the authority. At one point, we had the information from Barlow that Barlow was generating, and then we had the authority's numbers, and then we had Covanta's numbers, and we were trying to come to a good balance of it. In 2003, there was really very little to do. It was all based on projections that are done by the engineer, and how it fit into the financing. We provided financing numbers, projections, debt service costs that we projected to do those self-liquidating debt certificates. The underwriter supplied information that the engineer put into a certificate and put together. I'm not an engineer. However, did I question them? Yes, I did question them over the years. At that time, I also recommended to City Council that they get a second opinion, and they did so. The Buchart-Horn report was done. I never actually got to see the Buchart-Horn report that was done. And the county also had, their own group of professionals look at it. The self-liquidating debt certificate is something that was included and done, but, I really have very little to say about it.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. The last point I want to bring up, and you've already addressed this in your testimony here regarding the nature of these synthetic variable rates debt issue, the issue of the swaps, and the issue of they weren't uncommon during this period of time as a means to deal with interest rate risk or to raise capital. To your point, if you can bear with me, there's two things that I'm trying to raise. There's an issue in the forensic audit, and I'm just going to, if you bear with me, I'm going to say what it says. It says, taken individually, many of the swaps don't make sense as a means of managing interest costs and or protecting against rising interest rates. Collectively, the number of swap transactions alone raises questions regarding their relationship to a plan to manage interest rate risk or costs. Further, some of the swaps were inconsistent with each other and with principles of interest rate management. One swap reversed another that had just been entered into a short time earlier. In several instances, it appears the advisors were encouraging the authority to take actions aimed primarily at raising short-term funds, irrespective of whether the transaction was prudent. Listen, those are harsh assertions, and I think that you've already said that there was an issue of short-term obligation to do something that was important and of merit, at least on the basis of their independent reviews that were being relied upon for the authority's decisions. But in retrospect, you look back at these and you find out, and even in the representations made by Med Evans for the county, that some of these transactions should have been dealt with differently by the authority. And I guess I'm trying to get a handle on this issue of what advice was offered to the authority about these transactions, and if you can speak a little bit in your memory about what that was like for the board making decisions on these complex transactions.
Well, there were a number of swaps that were done by the city, previous to this swap. They had done some swaps of some general obligation debt. The Harrisburg Parking Authority had also done a number of swaps. The structure that was put together for the incinerator, specifically when we went from a fixed rate to a variable rate and then back into a fixed rate, was primarily engineered and structured by RBC. A lot of times it's a marketing call of what you can get you the lowest effective rate. 2002, 2003 was a time of dropping rates, and when we went with the fixed rate, we went with a fixed rate that was swapped to variable because it generated additional funds at the time and lowered the true interest cost to the authority on the project. That variable rate financing was later fixed when the market conditions came down, and we could lock in some of the variable rate debt at a fixed rate. And as I recall, the fixed rate was 3.35% that we did. After the project blew apart, the engineering didn't meet the requirements of the financing. The engineering didn't come true. It was the implementation of the plant was disastrous. Of the project was disastrous. The authority was aware that they needed an additional $12 million to do projects. They needed $5 million immediately to pay off some of the contractors that were involved. Terminating part of that swap and eliminating that cap of 3.3, that fixed rate of 3.35%, generated somewhere in the area of $4 million. Even though it wasn't a good idea to do, because I liked the 3.35% cap, it was up to the authority to decide whether they wanted the $4 million instead. And they needed the $4 million instead, unfortunately.
Understood. You mentioned the interest rate management plan entered into connection with 2003 swaps and caps, noted the authority shall review the long-term implications associated with entering into such agreements. So again, I think maybe what you've just represented is part of that process in terms of their need for capital and what instruments they held, what contracts they were obliged to honor. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. I appreciate your testimony.
Senator Fulmer had a follow-up to
Yeah,
one of your questions, Senator Blake.
on your previous comments, and try to bear with me on this, because I think the point of this hearing is that so far what we've heard is that the elected officials relied on the professionals. And I think what you're saying is that some of the professionals didn't come through, and my question to you is this, is that you're saying that the engineering firms that did the certification in the county did one as well. Who was the engineering firm? So we're trying to get to those professionals that would be held responsible, because here we have all this debt, and so far through this hearing and the previous hearing, I'm still hearing the same thing, is that there's nobody to blame, but we have all this debt, and we're just trying to get down to it.
My involvement is financing the project. And I know there's a lot of people that will look back now and say, the project financing was not good. The project financing was a very good financing. They had a very successful financing. The problem was with the implementation of the project, the actual management of the construction that was done at the incinerator.
But
the
who?
estimates that were done, the cost estimates were done by Barlow.
Okay.
I mean, that's my opinion
Okay.
of what went wrong.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Barnes, you had said that the swaps weren't unique, particularly at that period, but aren't 6 in 2 years somewhat unique?
Again, it was a very volatile time in the market, and we were facing a project that needed some changes to be made. Incidentally, I mean, one of the things that coming here, there were other ideas. The Harrisburg Authority didn't grab every idea that came along and run with it. There was a number of them that were done. Some people have brought up in the forensic audit mentions the off-market swap that was recommendation and killed. There were other things that the city and the authority and the county looked at and did not do. 6 swaps in 2 years.
Right.
For 3 sets of bonds, the ABCs being one in my the D, which is the retrofit, and the E and the Fs. Most of the swaps had to do with the Series D bonds, and that was the project funds. And 6 swaps in 2 years is unusual. Yes.
Well, to kind of strengthen what Senator Fulmer asked, I mean, I talked to a person during this hearing, the time we've been working on these hearings, and he said to me, with all these people involved, these deals just didn't pass the smell test. And it's hard to believe that with all the people involved in this process, all the professional people, all the elected officials, that somebody just didn't say, this isn't a good deal. We have to cut our losses and stop. And I don't know why yourself, the attorneys involved, the solicitors, the management, people advising the mayors, the authority members, and so on, somebody didn't say, this stuff just doesn't add up. And that's part of the problem we have with all these certifications that went to the state, to DCED, is that everybody signed off on everything, everybody said everything was fine. And it's hard for me to believe that somebody didn't recognize that these were very poorly structured deals, that this was a house of cards. When you look at that chart that's on the tripod over here, you see that this project never cash flowed, ever. I mean, how do you justify that you can go ahead and continue to borrow on something like that? And, you know, I have a 5-page memo from you to the authority, and Mayor Reed was copied on it. You explained, this was dated May 29th, 2007. You explained a lot of information about money and refinancing things, the retrofit project, where they were at the time, the CIT agreement, and so on. You had one paragraph in here on swaps out of that 5 pages, and it was pretty much a explanatory paragraph. You cautioned in the paragraph about some of the structure of short-term debt issue, which was their other alternative, and it made it seem to me, as reading it as a layman, that this was relatively a harmless avenue for them to pursue another swap deal. So, I mean, I'm just concerned that people in your position weren't being honest with their clients and with the public in through this process. Can you respond to that?
Well, the document you're referring to was a study that was requested to do for me to come up with an idea. When I opposed the off-market swap that they wanted to do to generate additional money, and they said, you know, what else can we do? The one thing about you know, any good project, before you take shots at the existing plan, you ought to come up with an alternative plan, and this was a way to come up with alternative plans. I am not I'm a very conservative person. By 2007, when that was written, the swap market had basically deteriorated in my mind, that the opportunities of, you know, 2001 to 2003, you know, were no longer there, that the swap market had become, you know, fuddled. I think the paragraph in there and the meeting and discussion of different plans brought that out a little bit more, that we weren't looking at doing swaps because the market had softened. Again, the financing we had in place, we did the best we could with what we had at the time. The problem is where it fell apart is in the construction. If you look at those revenues and those spreads right now, you'll see that the plant is now generating the revenues that it was projected to have in their report. One of the big problems has been in the expenses and the management of the expenses of the plant. And, you know, the Cavanta contract, I don't know how that worked. That was after my time. When all this started falling apart in 2007, I had some serious concerns, and as a result of that, I'm no longer employed by the Harrisburg Authority. We took it that far.
When you started your answer, you'd said about them considering another swap, and you made it seem like somebody else was proposing that. You were the financial advisor at the time, right? I mean, who else would have been proposing swaps?
Anybody and everybody, you know, that read about this in the paper or what was going on, they would call up, they would bring a recommendation, they would send information into the authority or to the mayor, to council, and say, look, I had this great idea, you should do this or you should do that. Part of what I did is, you know, they sent it over to me and said, look at this, what do you think of this idea? There were a lot more of them that got gonged, for lack of a better term. And when you talk to these people and you say to them, you know, we've considered it, we will take it into account, but most of them got killed. Most of them were deep sixed.
Senator Former has a follow-up here.
I'm hearing this again, and please forgive me, Mr. Barnes, but we have all these people running around. You did the best that you could. Everybody and anybody was suggesting to do these bonds. My question is, who was driving this train? Who's the final who was in charge? I mean, who was driving the train?
Well, ultimately, it's the Harrisburg Authority Board, who had responsibility. Again, it's a civic responsibility. I'm a member of a municipal authority where I live. It's a burden sometimes, and I'm not faulting them of where they decided. One thing is you have to remember is the incinerator, when they undertook the retrofit project, was $100 million in debt. The alternative, and one of the alternatives that we did look at, despite what they said, well, they did mention in the audit that we did look at it, and was the possibility of collapsing the debt that they have right now, not opening the plant, mothballing it, okay, not continuing. That $100 million was a hard
I guess
fight to take.
and I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm just confused. And that's probably easy to do, but what were the consultants being paid for? I mean, why wasn't this trying to be stopped? I mean, again, the way it's sounding to me is that, well, how this happened, and it's just one giant bad luck incident, as we did the best we could, and here we are with all the debt and such. But again, I see all these consulting fees, I see all these service fees. Why wasn't anybody trying to stop it? And if we know now, I mean, I granted, I understand hindsight's always 20/20, but folks, here's the scenario. We have all this debt on the heads of the people of Harrisburg, the citizens of Harrisburg, the county residents of Dauphin County, and probably the rest of the state to boot. And I think they deserve better than just, gee, this just happened. And again, my point, I guess that was a statement. I'm sorry, but my again is, no one seemed to try to stop it. It just seemed they just kept on going. And who was, again, you said the Harrisburg Authority was driving the train, I guess, but my point to you is that I think as a financial advisor in this, I think, didn't you folks have some role in this?
Yes. Our primary function is to give financial advice on the project, how to finance the project in the most economical manner, and make sure that the execution of the project and financing for the project is completed.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to make any other statements, and thank you very much.
Just one last point, Mr. Barnes, and thank you again. I said this at the first hearing, and it probably deserves some consideration here. We're just trying to collect information that could possibly inform future legislative action. And there's already been dialogue, Senator Fulmer mentioned this in a previous hearing, and I understand the market for swaps is not what it was in 2003. But do you have any opinion about something that could inform us legislatively? Maybe not an outright ban, but some other, what you might perceive to be good checks and balances, or any other legislative advice?
Regarding swaps?
Well, regarding municipal debt, regarding Laguda, regarding swaps, maybe all the above.
I think the Local Government and Debt Act is an excellent check on government, or local government units borrowing. The problem here that came up with the self-liquidating debt report and the process of doing that, I don't see an economical way of trying to fix that, of taking something that was poorly done, and the self-liquidating debt certificate for the city was poorly done, and we can say that now in hindsight. But one thing that the audit alleged was, in most times you have somebody independent doing this, and that's just not true. Most of the times, it's whoever designed the project does a self-liquidating debt certificate, and normally it works. I'm very familiar with it. I've done a lot of self-liquidating debt certificates. As a financial advisor, we can look at them. The question is at how far does the state have to go with that? How far at DCED does the legal people need to take that? Should they have in-house engineers to look at, like the old FHA used to, or pardon me, Farmers Home Administration, and it got to be very, very burdensome. I think what you're looking at is something that is unusual, but there are others that come to mind with this as something as simple as, most of them are sewer projects, and the question is $85 a reasonable amount for people to pay for a monthly sewer bill? PennDES says yes, it is. Would DCED also look at that and have sort of a guideline, of something like that? It's very complicated, and I admire you for trying to wade through it. As far as swaps go, I don't think that most local government units in Pennsylvania have any knowledge or ability on board to make that type of decision. And I don't think that most of them should be doing swaps or other derivatives. Some of them that are very simple, yes, but some of the complicated ones that I've seen them do, no.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes.
Mr. Barnes, though, the swaps that were done, though, they were your idea, though, right? The ones that were done?
No.
They weren't?
No. They were proposed by the structuring people at RBC. I can say that, to the best of my knowledge, I did not initiate any of the swaps that were done for the Harrisburg Authority.
Okay. The overall background of where these folks were whenever they started this project, they didn't have a performance bond. Were you aware of that at the time?
No.
It's interesting. A lot of people weren't aware of that. That's interesting.
Yes.
And since the project couldn't cash flow, it was based on the guarantees of the city and the county, I assume, to be sold. Is that accurate?
I think the bonds, and again, the underwriter would better discuss this, but in order to get municipal bond insurance, we need an additional guarantee. And that's why, the county's guarantee was necessary to finance the project. There was and still is a desire by everybody to have a municipal guarantee because it has the full faith, credit, and taxing power of the municipality behind it. Even with some of the strongest, revenue financings that I've done, we've done them with a municipal guarantee because they like to have the second shotgun. Is it necessary? In most cases, no, it's not. In this case, it was necessary to have the additional guarantee because there was the risk, and everybody was aware of the risk, that something would go wrong or could go wrong with this. And for people to sit here and say right now that they just gave the guarantee and because it was necessary, but they didn't ever expect to pay on it, is naive. The county has been a hero here. The county has done what they're required to do under the circumstances, and they are entitled to reimbursement from the Harrisburg Authority and from the project when that is able to be done. But the guarantees were necessary, yes.
Can you explain to me, two questions on this. The first one is how with investors through issuing these bonds, when there was more borrowing done, that the first people paid were always the city and the county for what they'd advanced. And that, of course, added to the new debt. I mean, the guarantees always added to the debt, and then paying back the guarantees added to the next debt, and it just, became a situation where the money was gone between fees, working capital, paying back debt. There's very little new money coming in to help with projects. Can you, I just don't understand how this works.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying, why did these costs get paid as part of the financing for the projects?
Yes.
Normally, the cost of a project includes the actual costs related to that project. In a lot of these circumstances, the city had advanced funds and wanted repaid those funds for costs, related to the incinerator. That's not unusual. There are strict regulations and code requirements, federal code requirements that restrict exactly what you can borrow, tax exempt. Some of these financings were done taxable and would not qualify as true project costs. Was it advisable to do that at the time? No, I don't think it was. Hindsight being 20/20, they couldn't afford it, and they kept on going deeper and deeper in debt. I was, when I was finance director, and Mr. Kroboth spoke earlier about the incinerator has always been a problem. And 1980, it was a problem. 1983, it was a problem. They continued to finance out of it because where else is the city going to come up with the funds? And they did that to, basically keep the incinerator from pulling the city down.
As I received a note from somebody who I don't know that asked me, that explained something to me, and let me ask you about this. They claim that the later bond deals weren't structured the same as the previous bond deals. They were less restrictive. They took out more restrictive covenants in the bond indenture, such as minimum debt service coverage ratio, additional bonds test, a limit on subordinate debt, and that would have affected the market price of the bonds. You aware of any of that?
No, I don't think that's correct. I think whoever gave you that question is misinformed.
Okay. Senator Fulmer.
And thank you for your patience. I just want to see if I heard you correctly. You said that those who made the guarantees thinking that they would not have to pay back this debt were naive.
To think that they might not be called upon to make a debt service payment.
Okay, if that's being the case, then how does this make the county a hero, knowing that they were naive in doing the guarantee? Basically, it looks like they were doubling down and actually putting the county residents at risk with this debt.
Apparently, Senator, the county was not naive and I did say they were the hero. They stepped to the plate and did what they were supposed to do. And I don't think that the county has been negligent in any of their guarantee honors.
But,
Yeah, and I have not been
but
involved.
the debt
since-
was not self-liquidating, and they stepped to the plate. I understand what you're trying to say, that they didn't want to see the city go down. And they were trying to, if I'm understanding this correctly. But my point is, I think, is that as we're moving forward here, here we have them basically like a gambler at the casino going, well, you know, this is my last shot here. We're going to double down and go forward, knowing that this was bad debt.
Which financing are you talking, what financing are you talking about?
Would it be 2007? 2007.
Okay, again,
That what was a $30 million bond issuances and such. That's what I'm referring to. So
I was dismissed during the planning stage for the 2007 bond.
okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Barnes, thank you very much for your time. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.